Yeah, so I basically grew up in Melbourne, and my parents have been living in around Castlemaine for 17 years or so. So I've been here a lot, but never lived here. And when I was overseas, I knew very much that I wanted to live in this area for multiple reasons. So I was sort of projecting myself here, but as I mentioned, it happened sooner than anticipated. But never, always living in a city, it's very interesting to kind of rethink what an artistic practice is in a smaller community and in a regional setting, and also when you're more present with the ecology, which can be disguised under bitumen and under sort of this international urban environment in the city. Sort of, so I've just been very much in this lockdown period, slowing down and being present, like lots of people, with the location that one finds oneself in these times. And even the fact we don't have bitumen on the road here or street lights, there's a very different quality to this place. So yeah, anyway, it's got me thinking a lot, but also wanting to know more about who and what is happening, who is here and what is happening locally, and to really reconsider my artistic practice on a local scale. And from that situated position, still engage in conversations that are happening across the planet and with my friends and colleagues overseas, but from a very grounded, embedded and embodied position, within this area. And I think I've been thinking a lot also around the history, obviously, with this being gold mining country and the mining boom, and what and there's so many sites here with holes that still puncture the earth, and the sort of degraded landscape, and where the history is still very present on the surface, and the implications of this mining boom on the Indigenous peoples, but also in Melbourne, the wealth that Melbourne has come from. Originally, a big part of that was from this area and the mining booms and the gold rush. And so thinking through those legacies and those relationships and those sites of healing, or to readdress also the toxicity of these damaged landscapes, and how they might also open up dialogue of being with also our own embeddedness or indebtedness to this site and these histories as non-Indigenous people.
I essentially cut them into strips however I can, because usually they're really bizarre shapes, none of them are the same. And then I hole punch them with I have a hand, I hole punch them with a hand hole punch that has an arm crank. So I kind of feed them through, and I turn into like a sewing machine, if you could imagine. I put those in, and then
you pull them through.
Pump, and I pull them through as I pump, and I go quite quickly.
That's good.
And then I have to cut them into tiny squares again, which I do regularly.
So you were saying something before about there being some contrasting what you're doing here with, say, mechanized production. That what were you guys saying? Something about this being different to what you were saying. It's all coming from you. You're not like a
doing the
person
whole
on
process.
an assembly line.
Even though it feels like it should be an assembly line because of the processes that are involved.
So yeah, the fact that it's got this heavily manual component, which is repetitive, and that definitely does sort of symbolise that type of making of the last century, of kind of just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And yet this is obviously a more holistic process for you, because it's your idea and you're expressing yourself through it.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I think it's funny because it's like, I'm actually okay to take a long time to make works. I think had I been younger, I may not have had the patience, but I'm actually all right with the time, which seems weird because time is changing shape again. Like it seems like it's going faster.
For you personally, or just
Yeah.
the world? And is that what's that to do with? Do you
I
think?
think it's just age, and
You've got
like
a lot going on.
age and where you're at. Like,
Jam-packed life.
yeah, you know what it's like to have lots going on. But it's like, you know, each day is moving really quickly.
Yeah.
And I do think when you do make things that take a long time changes shape, and you can really slow it down and use it differently. Use it in a different way.
Is there frustration involved in the laboriousness of it? Does it get frustrating sometimes?
No, that was one thing an art lecturer said to me once. I'm okay with.
This is what you said.
He was like, "Oh, you're okay with that?" You know, like other people may get frustrated, but no, I don't.
You don't get
It's just quite
frustrated.
interesting. Yeah.
Although it makes sense given what you just said about when you're making, that's a time when you basically
There you
think
go.
and feel and everything comes back and things make sense, maybe like that. Isn't that surprising? It's a meditation in a way, I suppose.
Yeah, and as you say, like, where is home? Well, this is it. Like, it's like that's
Yeah.
so that's my time of when I'm home, I suppose. Really.
How does that work for you in terms of being here? Like, you know, this is where you live, and do you feel like a connection to the land here?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think being in place has always been a really important part of my practice, like responding to place. And I think, you know, my anti-nuclear work has always been about being out on country and returning to sites over and over and over again, and finding familiarity in those landscapes and feeling at home, even though they're places that are so far away from where I actually live, because you kind of return to them so much. They become familiar, and you have friends who live, you know, in all of these different places across the country, and you can go there and feel immediately connected through both the activism that we're doing and the kind of journeying and travelling to those spaces. And I think, so moving to Central Victoria about 7 years ago, 8 years ago we moved up to near Dalesford, and I think, you know, being amongst the forest and then kind of seeing the impacts of like the mining landscape and the history of mining, and then obviously colonisation, I think when you're an artist and you're a photographer, you know, you are responding to what's around you. And I think every day you're noticing changes, and you're noticing the birds and you're noticing the animals, and you kind of, it becomes very much a part of your work. Like here, you know, we can hear all of these birds, and I can, you know, this is Crown Mound at the back here, but it's an old mining site. Like, these are dams left over from the Wattle Gully mine. It's at the top of the hill. And I don't know, I think naturally it just becomes part of the work. If it's not necessarily literally part of the work, it's very much about how I'm experiencing the kind of landscape and place around me, which, you know, very much, I don't know, it forms part of my work. Like, I've been noticing that, especially during being here more often during coronavirus, and listening to the frogs have just gone wild over the springtime, you know, and I notice the frogs every year, but this year I noticed them like 10 times more. And I don't know, I think you just notice more changes when you're living in a place like this.
So
I did one a little while back. It's on Tim Church website, and I took these Aboriginal kids out to show them how to take a shield off a tree. Who's that shield? I'll be up. It's down here. No, it's a big one. I was sitting up there. Oh, where's it gone now? But it's a tradition that, you know, goes back 1,000 years when they took canoes and that off, and but it's not done a lot now. So we wanted to take this dish off, but in reality it was going to be a canoe to go into a animated story about Aboriginals in canoes up on the Murray. So that worked, you know. And when I watched it, I thought, wow, how good it was. You know, there was a few modern day things. I got the kids to get textures out and draw the shape. But the rest was traditional, you know. We get steel axe, but then and it got them to do little wedges, and I said, and the other thing was being careful, you know, but there's snakes everywhere out here. Watch what you're doing. But I think they were noisy, we didn't see a snake. And the next day I nearly got bitten out there because I didn't have the kids to make the noise, I think. I was walking along soft, I nearly tread on the damn thing. So, but that when you see that, and it fits into the story, the art piece, that takes it to another level. Of this beautiful red gum bark coolerman, but really it's a canoe. Yeah.
It sounds like they learn so much in those processes.
Yeah, and like even though it was an art project, as we were walking along, I had a bit of wire in my pocket and the axe, and so I showed him how to find a grub. You know, and now look at this tree. See the dust coming down this trunk. And you follow it up, and now the worst thing I've got to now wear glasses to find them because I've got to put these on and look up. No, there it is, because you've got to look for a little tiny little O where it's gone in, and you chip that, and then we get the little wire and hook it out. Now who's going to eat it?
How do they go with that?
Some don't like it.
So these kids, those that are Indigenous, they haven't had exposure to the wisdom and the traditions of their...
Yeah, a lot of them haven't. Yeah, especially the ones in the towns and the cities.
Yeah.
A lot of them in, even the ones at foster care, I love doing them, doing workshops with them, and for some of them doing something with their hands rather than is easier than for them writing or computers, and but that can cross over, I reckon, too. A lot of non-Aboriginal kids don't like sitting in a classroom. They prefer outdoor learning, so
makes sense.
it makes sense, doesn't it?
With the so the stories that you're telling and the work that you're making with the kids, how much of what you're asking them or saying to them do you think is you passing on like your history and stuff, and how much of it is you? Do you know what I mean? Like how much is the individual?
Most
how
of
much
it.
is the
Most
of it's you?
Most of it's
the history.
It's the history.
So you're a conduit.
Yep.
Do you feel that?
Yeah, for sure.
And
I make that important. I make them know that.
Yeah.
I'm handing it down to you, but you're going to hand it down to your kids, and then your grandkids will learn. So it's that oral tradition.
So you're not the owner of it.
But I'm caretaker.
Yeah, you're.
What do you feel rooted here for the foreseeable future?
Yeah.
And if so, how does that take place, do you think? Is it history for you, or?
It's feeling a very strong desire to really keep working on telling the story, you know, developing the narrative, and I also really want to work much more closely with the Dja people.
Okay.
Because I do recognise I've been engaged but not enough. You know, always involved and engaged, but
There's more.
there's so much more. Yeah. And in this whole area. And then when I discovered this potential connection with Ravenswood Mount Alexander, it's like, oh my God, maybe it is, you know, my ancestors have lived on this land for a long time. And because I really feel like I'm magnetised to it.
So
it's energetically connected.
Right. It's an amazing description of a connection to an area. And also of it being about a sort of, would you say, a sort of almost like there's a mythology within your family history as well.
Although those stories weren't spoken, our family didn't.
Right. Okay, so...
It's really interesting that our family were not the kind of family that sat around with Nana and Grandpa and shared the stories. We didn't see much of them. And my Nana and Grandpa had actually moved to Sydney by the time we got back to Australia, or by the time my parents came back to Australia. And they didn't move back to Melbourne, they moved to Canberra. So there's been a very fragmented, as is our kind of culture, really.
Yeah, so that's a key thing, isn't it?
A lot of our culture, we're not deeply connected, so it's easy to up and move. And yet somehow we sometimes go back to where it all began.
I was going to say, do you think that urge to deeply connect is like a human thing? Do you think that's in us? too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what I love so much about Castlemaine, it's more like a village than anything.
It also speaks to the horror, really, of what you're talking about in the 1800s in particular.
Yep.
Because of that energetic style connection to place and how fundamental, it's fundamental.
Yep. And wanting to help heal.
Wanting to help heal.
Heal the land and heal the culture. And sort of re-expose or expose some of the lost stories.
Yeah. And stories being critical too. You've mentioned that. There's something about storytelling.
Yep.
Picture art does, it's very, like you said, narrative, use the word narrative, it's strongly narrative based, your painting.
Yep.
Yeah.
And particularly going back to the early narratives.
Well, so with this might be sort of relating to what you were just saying, Suze, but just going further on that. So your interest in architecture I'm interested because there's a few things here. So the clay is like very earthy and like obviously, but architecture, to me, what I know of architecture, I always tend to think of like quite grand, like modern architecture, and so what I'm seeing here too, these kind of like big imposing
monumental things, yes.
Monumental, yeah. So it's kind of like an interesting bringing together of a really organic, earthy ground thing, and then the sort of monolithic,
Well, and also I guess clay is, and especially terracotta clays and red clays is very indicative of brickwork, which is such a common architectural material, and I think it's sort of an extension of using that sort of material to make almost mini architecture in a way. Yeah.
And again, the size is fascinating, because if we think about what we just said about the
You've shrunk it down.
Yeah.
monumental, in which case you've got the power.
Yes, totally. Yeah. It's almost like a little cityscape.
And then there's something cute about it as well, which is not probably what your classic architect
No, I don't want to be known as cute.
No architect is just that I want to.
And they're imposing, and
Oh, and there's that sort of omnipotence of a building, which is classic for the sort of architectural feat.
Yes.
So is that conscious with what you're doing?
I don't know if it's. I think it's maybe more subconscious. I think the scale of what I do. I find that perhaps, say, I spent a couple of days on a little body of work, or a few days in a row, I'll see that the scale, whether I don't really. It's not an intent, but I'll step back and see that everything can sort of be like a little cityscape of, this one might be next to one taller one, and you could almost see it on a skyline in a very strange city, but they sort of work together. So the more I do that type of work, I guess I notice it, and then I put it into practice the next time around, and then do it more intently. Yeah.
So what's interesting though is that so what you're doing there is sort of like almost like an art concept. Really, it feels like an art concept, and yet what you're making are objects that can be used. So it's bringing that
sense of utility. A lot of my work is mostly vases and jugs, and I like the sense that it can be something that can be used, but it may never be used. Like someone may just put it up on their shelf and admire it, but it's got that sense of fragility. It's like a showpiece, like it's the special piece that I might never use as an actual pouring jug or something, but it does have that potential to be used.
So it's sort of quite grounded in that way.
Yes.
Being practical.
And at that point, it becomes directly related to a home in a very functional way.
It does.
Incredibly, because it's.
It's designed for homes a lot, isn't it?
And it's supposed to be something that will look beautiful and sculptural on a shelf or a mantelpiece. But you might decide to use it every single day. So I'd like to think of my work as sort of somewhere between functional, sculptural, and art and design.
That's definitely, that's what it is.
But yeah, I love this town. I love my house, my home.
Great.
Yeah.
So does this house, your home feels like home? This is home?
Yeah, it does now.
And what is it about it that makes it feel home?
I guess just a huge set of experiences over a long period of time.
So do you think that's something that's important to the concept of home? Like, could you move somewhere and it be home right away, or do you think it requires time?
Well, that's kind of, home is kind of debatable, I guess, isn't it? I mean, what's her name? I don't know, Zuboff's Edge of Surveillance Capitalism. But she actually said something interesting about home, which was, I can't remember what she said, but so don't, but it was basically the idea that a home doesn't have to be a single dwelling or a place. And I found that quite interesting. I read that I think when it came out in 2018. At the time I was making a project with a couple of collaborators called Home is Inside Us.
Yeah, I saw that on your Facebook page.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, so at that time, so before that I'd been doing a lot of commuting, so this kind of the distance between, and that was based on working mothers. So, and that was a sound piece, a film, the outcome of that.
One of my main collaborators around that time was Henrietta Casey-Schuster. She's a German-born, Melbourne-based, or now Castlemaine-based artist and practitioner, and she'd also come from performance, so her background wasn't visual arts either. And she also had a child the same age as Loretta, so we'd take turns with whose house we'd go to. So we'd be working in my home or we'd be working in her home. And, I often feel like slightly fraudulent that I've never had a dedicated studio space. Like, I've never been an artist who has a studio to go and practice in, or, leave work set up in and come back to it untouched. And
Fraudulent though, it's just like time and money, basically.
Yes, yeah. And I feel like maybe I should have that one day, but at the same time, I'm so used to making work around my kitchen table, and actually, I suppose because of not having a studio, in a way that has really informed some of the work that I've made. A lot of the early works that we were making, if we couldn't get what we wanted in the home, then it was about going for drives or walks at night in the local landscape and shooting stuff nearby from home, so you weren't too far away from your kids if they woke up and needed to be breastfed or something. You would be shooting something down at Merry Creek, which was a 5-minute walk from home. And so, I suppose not having a studio kind of forced us out into other locations.
Sounds incredibly resourceful, and I guess that's what motherhood has done for you, is forced that sort of, I'm sure you were resourceful before that.